Hey, welcome back to Crusader Pub. It's been a little over a week since my last video. I've been busy. I moved my little recording area into my closet, hence the beautiful sheet behind me. And that was mostly so that I could start recording audiobooks, which is one project I was working on over the last week, which is why I haven't put out a video in that time. That said, I wanted to address another one of Prophet of Zod's videos where he asked 5 questions to Christian apologists. And I already did his 7 questions for Christians. I will link that video at the end here. And now I want to address his 7 questions for Christian apologists. He has another video or questions for biblical history, something along those lines. So I want to get to that video eventually as well. But right now, we're going to start 7 questions for Christian apologists.
So a few weeks ago, I started writing down a list of questions for Christians, because surprise, surprise, I do script my videos.
I don't, and it shows.
I envision these questions being posed to average everyday Christians who hear popular apologetics in passing and think things like, where did the universe come from without God, is a slam dunk against atheism.
So the title of the video is called 5 Questions for Christian Apologists. But they're not actually questions for Christian apologists, they're questions for strawmen.
Number 1. Why should an atheist have to explain things about science to justify not believing in God? We've all heard it a million times. If you don't believe in God, then explain how the universe came from nothing. Or, atheists think life evolved randomly from single-celled organisms.
I don't think you've ever heard someone say that. I think you've heard Bill Maher say that someone says that. There's a big difference. You've created a big straw man that you want to try to tear down. But that said, last video, I was willing to give him the benefit of the doubt. He seemed sincere. He genuinely wanted to get Christians to think about their faith and get them to see things from his point of view. This video just seems to be some atheist hoorah, try to get the atheists all excited and riled up for his side. And we'll see some more of that as this video goes on.
But this obviously makes no sense for a couple reasons. First off, why do people who don't believe in God have to think the same things about biology or cosmology? People who don't believe in vampires don't share all the same ideas about science, right? They just heard people propose a being exist, didn't find the evidence for it compelling, and thus don't believe. Simple as that.
It's interesting that he brings up vampirism here, because that was actually a field of medical study on why vampires do or don't exist. A few hundred years ago, people believed vampires existed and they actually came from their graves. And when they would dig up bodies, they would seem to find evidence of the fact. Blood around people's mouths, hair seemed to grow longer, fingernails seemed to continue to grow. The bodies weren't decomposing like they had expected. And that was actual physical phenomena they had to look at and investigate. So yes, just because people today take for granted that hearing about vampires doesn't make sense, doesn't mean that there wasn't a whole lot of research and study and science involved in reaching that conclusion at the scholastic level that has trickled down to the popular level. He can't just wipe a brush and say, just because popular level atheists don't agree on science doesn't mean that we can ignore it. No, you don't get a pass on that at all. Now, if you want to find out some more about vampires, I got this information from Elizabeth Miller's Bram Stoker's Dracula. She is the editor who put together a bunch of articles about vampires, specifically surrounding Bram Stoker's writing. So it's a really fascinating book. If you're into vampires, if you're into occult history or anything like that, that's an excellent book to read. A lot of historical stuff in there.
This was dramatically illustrated in a Facebook post, which I'll replay here from my first Dumb Things video, in which a pastor I used to know said this.
Yeah, random Facebook posts by random people are definitely where you should get your Christian apologetics. And it's also definitely where you should look to find the cream of the crop of Christian apologetics. I'm not even going to show you the clip that he posts here on Facebook. It's completely irrelevant. It's what you expect, a pastor asking some random science questions to try to explain without the use of God. I mean, it's a Facebook post. It's for his people who are already convinced on his side. There's no, there's obviously no depth involved. And again, the video is called 5 Questions for Christian Apologists, not 5 questions for random people on Facebook.
I mean, pretend you and a friend are in a building, and you hear a mysterious thumping coming from a locked room. Neither of you know exactly what's causing the noise, right? In this story, right, which is why I called it mysterious. I mean, try to keep up, okay? But your friend just tells you it's the ghost of King Louis XIV. You chuckle and say, I don't believe you, and he says, well then explain everything about how the building's boiler and heating system works, implying that unless you can, you should believe in the ghost of King Louis XIV. Now, of course, this would be absurd.
Yeah, obviously that scenario is absurd. Let me give you a more accurate one. Let's say me and a buddy are in a house and I say, hey, this house has a boiler and a heating system. And your friend says, no, it doesn't. So I show him the boiler and the heating system and he goes, well, just happened to get there somehow without any help. And I said, no, a contractor came in there and installed it. And he said, no, I haven't met the contractor. That's a much better analogy. I'll admit it's still weak, but it's got a lot more going for it than what he just threw out there.
Number 2. How does a person get from the conclusion that the universe's origins are unintuitive to the conclusion that God created the universe? Of course, apologists don't think they're just guessing that God created the universe. They claim to be able to deduce as much through argumentation, the most famous form of this being the Kalam cosmological argument. Now yes, this syllogism is just riddled with problems, the most obvious being that it appeals to our simplified sense of intuition about cause and effect to draw conclusions about aspects of the universe that probably defy our intuition. But that's a lot to dig into here.
So this atheist, this naturalist, this guy who tells you that everything that you believe in should be tested by the scientific method, is going to tell you that something that has been made a law, a scientific law, via the scientific method, should not be trusted in this case when it comes to the beginning of the universe? Everything that begins to exist has a cause for its existence. It's not just intuitive. That's something that you can actually test and prove over and over and over again. And now you're saying, oh, no, don't trust that. Don't believe that. This is classic atheist inconsistency.
What I would ask a Christian is, even assuming this argument is both sound and valid, what does it conclude? All it tells us is there was some cause to the universe.
Yeah, and that's a big point to make. Famous atheists like Stephen Hawking, Lawrence Krauss, Richard Dawkins are desperate for an eternally existing universe. In fact, despite the fact that a lot of young Earth creationists oppose the Big Bang Theory, the atheist community was the one that initially rejected the Big Bang because it would point to a creator.
One that we would probably infer is highly unintuitive, far different from anything we've seen so far, and likely beyond our imagination. And because it's so far different from anything we know, it could be literally anything.
Yeah, we'd probably call it God.
Maybe there's a purely natural reality that lies outside our realm of observation and defies the laws we've used to describe the universe so far.
A law of nature beyond the law of nature? Something like supernature? Like natural, but like above that, supernatural?
Maybe space and time as we know it could be the unfolding of some higher dimensional structure.
I don't even know what to say.
Now yes, these are just guesses. But unlike apologists, I'm not making the grandiose claim that I can reason my way down to the right guess.
Which is literally the purpose of conducting science. What he's saying here is that because he doesn't like the conclusion that it leads him to, he's allowed to just ignore it.
The point is that the possibilities are endless.
Yes, but there's only one right answer. And if all scientists conducted science like Prophet Azad is suggesting here, then we wouldn't know anything. We would still be trying to figure out how the wheel works.
Watch Craig over and over in that clip. Catalog what he actually says. And come to terms with the fact that this gush of verbal diarrhea represents one of Christianity's most illustrious attempts at going from a cause to God. Based on this, I would ask Christians, do you really feel qualified to jump to these kinds of conclusions?
So what you missed there was he played a fairly lengthy clip from William Lane Craig's opening statement in a debate, and then he went on kind of a lengthy mini rant about how much he didn't like it, which didn't add anything to the conversation, so I pretty much skipped it, but this is the end portion that he wraps it up with. And I don't know if he's ever read any philosophy before or how people know what they know. I don't know if he knows about coherence of the universe or coherence of reality. I don't think he's ever actually studied the academics who have these discussions. And it's one thing to watch the debates on YouTube. They're always really neat. I always enjoy them. I'm always out for the blood, just like everyone else who watches debates. But they don't really get you as far as an actual written debate where they spend over the course of years writing articles back and forth that get published. And this is where the real slog is, because you have to read through them and they're boring and terrible. And even the ones that I really love reading are boring and terrible, and it sucks to read through them all. But it's important that you do, because that's where the arguments are actually being made in an effective way. And if you read the arguments with William Lane Craig or with Alvin Plantinga or any of these other Christian philosophers, that's not how the conversation goes. None of these philosophers are worried about William Lane Craig's assertions. They seem to actually agree with them. That if the universe has a God as a cause, God would necessarily be immaterial. He would necessarily be beyond the natural world. And he would be personal and not impersonal. These are things that philosophers, particularly Western philosophers, aren't arguing about. They're arguing about whether the universe has a different cause than a supernatural being, or whether the universe has always existed, or whether there is a universe-making universe. There's lots of directions the arguments go, but none of them say, oh, Craig, you're wrong on this assertion. At least none that I've come across, except at this popular level, atheist apologetics.
Number 3. What would an undesigned universe look like to someone within that universe? This is a pretty simple question, but I think it's worth getting a Christian to consider.
When you look at a mountain, and it seems that the side of the mountain makes the shape of a human face, odds are rain, wind, sun, those things work together to make the shape that your brain then interprets to look somewhat like a human face. Then you have other mountainsides, Rushmore, where you see human faces carved into the side of the mountain, and you can clearly tell that they are carved intentional faces in the side of the mountain. When you come across, a watch on a beach, doesn't take a genius to look at it and say, hey, this was a designed, man-made piece of equipment. And I don't care how much you don't like the watchmaker analogy, you still have that reality that if you do find something, you can usually tell if it's man-made or if it's naturally occurring. When you find a computer, even someone who wouldn't know what a computer is can look at a computer and know that nature did not make that computer. And say you could even get it running, and you turn it on, and you look at it, and you don't understand anything about what's happening in this computer, you still know. In fact, its complexity would actually confirm that it has a designer. So when you look at our universe, and it seems that no matter how far out you go into the universe, you can start right here on Earth itself, or you can go out into the universe, everything about our vast universe seems to be there to help our planet thrive.
On top of that, since the modern Christian version of the designer is all-powerful and created everything from scratch, we must acknowledge that for every solution he designed, he also designed the problem.
I live in a town that probably has a higher proportion of atheists and non-Christians than a lot of towns in America. So I guess in one way I've been kind of fortunate in being able to have those conversations with a lot of atheists and have a lot of challenges thrown my way. But I had one guy. He was a pretty good guy. I don't know how he's doing. I should probably actually reach out to him on social media or something. But He gave me this book to read, and it talks about the reproduction of the bedbug, and it's absolutely horrendous and not something I'm going to go into here on YouTube. I can't remember the name. I can't remember the author. If you know, if you can write it in the comments, I'd appreciate it, because I would love to buy a copy of that book. That said, the reproduction of the bedbug, it being so horrendous, how can God, who supposedly designed everything, design something so horrendous? And my response was, a Christian can expect that. The Christian who believes that Genesis gives us that answer. And you don't have to be a young earth creationist to say that. Whether you think Genesis chapter 3 is literal or allegorical, or I guess those are really the two options, but kind of regardless of how you interpret the beginnings of Genesis, you come away with the idea that there was man, and man did something he wasn't supposed to do, and like a good parent, like a just judge, God set punishments in place. And part of that is the world is not going to be a paradise for us. The world is going to be hard. It's going to be difficult. And things will change and evolve in not great ways. And one of those ways is bedbug reproduction. I guess my real point is that the idea that God designed the problem first, that's not something that Christians have to run from. We can acknowledge God created the problems too. And it was not for no reason.
Number 4. If you believe that God is perfect or all-knowing, how did you arrive at this conclusion? This question very succinctly demonstrates just how much Christians flatly assume about God. To conclude that a being is perfectly good, you'd not only have to have a concept of good that's independent of that being, an idea that in and of itself is problematic for many Christians, but you'd have to judge that being based on your own concept of good.
Here he makes some very Western, modern assertions that are, I don't think, true, and I reject his assertions. But that aside, and any question of morality that he brings up right now aside too, I'll save that kind of conversation for another video. The ontological argument is going to be a fantastic argument to reach the idea of a perfectly good and all-knowing God. And if you do decide to go look into that, I recommend that you do. Read actual articles on it. Read the actual philosophical knowledge on it. Don't read the popular atheist or even the popular Christian's version of it. If you really want a good understanding, read the actual argument, read the rebuttals, read the counter rebuttals and the improvements. My personal favorite is Alvin Plantinga's version, but yeah, it's a good argument, and it explains why we formulate the idea of God that we have.
Number 5. How would the existence or non-existence of a God make morality fundamentally different? This question, of course, addresses moral arguments for God, as well as the often repeated assertion that, say it with me everybody, without God we have no basis for morality.
Again, straw manning. I don't know any Christian that has made this argument. Maybe he found it on a Facebook post.
Basically, morality, by definition, is whatever is in God's nature. Of course, all this does is shift the definition of morality from any actual intelligible concept to the preferences of another being. The problem with this is that God's nature would either 1. Be such that his preferences align with the constructive, empathetic behaviors we associate with morality, or 2. Be indifferent to or even set in opposition to those behaviors, meaning he'd be what we consider cruel or uncaring.
So he just is going the subjective route for morality, which is the way that an atheist does have to go ultimately. This isn't quite the same as saying that they have no basis for morality, just that their morality is going to be based on their own subjective thoughts and beliefs, as probably determined by society. But the problem, too, is that societal morality changes all the time. We can use LGBT and then now P, progression in society as an example of that. 25 years ago, any of that would have just been balked at, but now it's just accepted, and anyone who doesn't accept it is just a bigot. Well, I guess call me a bigot because I still reject it, and I'm going to teach that that it's wrong. And I think one of the most evil things you can do is tell a child that they were born in the wrong body and that they should get pumped full of poisons and have their genitals mutilated. I think that's absolutely evil to put that into society. And I think I am on the right side of history here. But the thing is, there are things in the Bible that might make even the most ardent Christians squeamish. And that's okay, because he's right to an extent that if morality is based on God's nature and morality is always changing society, you might not like or you might consider cruel what God's morality is. But ultimately, if God exists and if he is good, you're much better off basing your goodness on him instead of on your feelings or society's feelings. I mean, it wasn't that long ago society thought that killing off a certain race of people was acceptable, and that the best thing we can do is to carefully plan the genetic information that's passed on by families. And I'm not talking about Hitler. I'm talking about Planned Parenthood in the United States. It was started to stop African American reproduction. So, morality, let's base it on something a little better than society.
If it's number one, it's just by coincidence, and if it's number two, he wouldn't be moral in any useful sense of the word.
That's just a baseless assertion.
If we're obligated to God, we can be equally, and just as objectively, don't even get me started on that word, obligated to other humans. If he's an exemplar, humans can be too, though to lesser degrees.
To borrow a quote, you either die a hero or you live long enough to become the villain. I'm looking at you, Columbus.
And we can do our best to work toward good moral behaviors, even if a God doesn't instruct us.
So, in the case of transgenderism, is telling a child that they were born in the wrong body, pumping them full of poison and mutilating their genitals, is that the kindest or the most evil thing that you can do to that child? Well, if we go by the whims of society, in less than 5 years, it's probably going to be required to say that it's the kindest thing that you can do for them, even though it is forever going to be the most evil thing you can do to them. So, what morality are you building towards, PoZ?
Hopefully you enjoyed it, and just as hopefully you'll join me next time. Also, hopefully like, comment, and subscribe and everything.
And ditto. If you liked this video, give it a thumbs up. If you didn't, give it a thumbs down. If you give it a thumbs down, just let me know in the comments why, and I'll try to do better next time. One thing I do want to work on is the lighting in this closet. It's dark and you can't really see my face, and I hate it. But yeah, hopefully next time I'll look a little better than I do today, and I'll be looking forward to answering some more of Prophet Azad's questions.